Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I want to continue the discussion about Alliance Wars. Now, if you missed my last 30-minute video about Alliance Wars, I'll give you the quick 1-minute recap right now. Basically, 9 months ago, during Season 1 of Alliance Wars, I was already feeling burned out about the game mode. I stated that it was my least favorite game mode, least favorite thing to do in Marvel Contest of Champions. I was actually dreading participating in each and every single war, and I stated that no matter what Kabam does, I'm just not going to enjoy Alliance Wars. However, that was 9 months ago, and over time I've kind of shifted my focus from, caring so much about whether we won or lost, caring about if we get a certain tier of rewards or missed out on that tier of rewards, and kind of changed my focus to, playing with the champions that I enjoy playing with the most, and which at the time was Medusa, and I also used Nebula as well, but mostly Medusa, who I previously had on defense, took her off of defense, started playing with her, and just wanted to get better at playing with Medusa, basically. That's what I kind of cared about, and that was my main focus. Alliance Wars is kind of this secondary thing that was just kind of happening on the side of just kind of enjoying playing Marvel Contest of Champions with the champions that I enjoyed. So I was no longer burnt out about the game mode, ultimately. Now, what I did not mention in the last video is that Alliance Wars, it's still nowhere near my favorite game mode. I do enjoy it more now than I did back then, but if I had to kind of list out each thing to do in Marvel Contest of Champions, it wouldn't be anywhere near the top. It is kind of what I focus on in terms of, rank ups for the most part and that type of thing, but it's still nowhere near the top of the list of what I enjoy. And I think that there are a lot of things that Kabam could do to make the game mode better. And when I think about ways to improve Alliance Wars, I think about 4 categories, really. I think about the overall fun factor of each war, the item or unit cost associated with it, the time factor, how much time you need to kind of put into things in order to do well in Alliance War, and the anxiety that's associated with it. And anxiety is something that I mentioned a lot in the last video as well, something that I feel that is largely within the player's control and just kind of how you think about Alliance Wars in the game overall. But I do think that there is something that Kabam can do as well to improve on the anxiety levels as well, and all 4 of those things, really. And today I'm going to propose one change. It's a relatively small change, alright, so it's not like it's suddenly going to make you fall in love with Alliance Wars. It's not going to completely reinvent the game mode if you currently don't like it, but I do think it's a good change, and I do think it pushes the game mode in the right direction. So I'm going to propose one change to Alliance Wars, but before I do that, I really need to tell you guys a bit of a story here. I need to go back in time to 2001, where I didn't know it at the time, but I discovered what is now my favorite game of all time, which is Diablo 2. If you're not familiar with Diablo 2, it's an action RPG game for PC where you're controlling a single character with your keyboard and mouse. You have different abilities or spells bound to keys on your keyboard, but for the most part you're controlling that character with your mouse. You point and click somewhere on the screen to move to that location, you point and click on an enemy to attack them, and you point and click on the items that they drop after you kill them. You're leveling up because you're gaining experience for each enemy that you kill. You're finding stronger weapons and armor to just kind of make yourself more powerful overall, and the stronger you get, the deeper into the game that you're able to kind of explore. And that's the gist of what Diablo 2 is. Of course, if anyone has played the game, which I'm sure a lot of you have, you know it goes a lot deeper than that, but that's all you really need to know if you haven't played it for me to continue on with this story. So, like I said, I love this game. This is my favorite game of all time. It's a game that I can still go back to this day and still have a good time in it. But it's not the type of game that receives constant updates. It's the type of game where the developers, they created it, super polished, they released it, there was a few updates afterwards, and that's pretty much it. That's where we're at today. So of course, you get bored not receiving any updates, look to play something else. Even if there was updates, eventually you look to play something else, right? And I was looking for a new game to play after a while, and I realized, there's still a mode that I hadn't really tried in Diablo 2. You see, when you create a character, there's a little box that you can check off to create a hardcore character. Now, what I've been playing is known as softcore. There's no real difference between softcore and hardcore. The games are identical except for one thing, and that thing is if you die in hardcore, that's it. it's permadeath. All right, the only way to continue playing the game is if you create a new character. You start at level 1. You have no items. Good luck on your next adventure. And when I first started playing Diablo 2, I'm like, why would anyone ever want to play this game mode? This is ridiculous. You know, it could take a lot of time. It could take a lot of hours to create a very powerful character, and to just be able to lose them in an instant in hardcore mode, that sounds dumb. I would never play this game mode. But eventually, like I said, I was bored. I was looking for something new to play, and in the meantime, while I was looking for a new game, I was like, well, alright, let me just check this box. Let me see how far I can get just for fun. And what I realized is that, man, hardcore mode was a lot of fun. It was like playing a brand new game. I realized that I had only been playing half of Diablo 2 up until that point. And I'm not calling softcore half and hardcore the other half. No, I'm talking about as I was playing in softcore mode, there was just so many things that I did not care about. In softcore mode, all I cared about was how fast I can kill enemies on the screen in order to gain experience the quickest, in order to have the best chance at finding the next item that's going to make my character, you know, more powerful. That's all I cared about. Well, suddenly, playing hardcore mode and only being able to die one single time, or not even being able to die one single time, because that's it once you die, suddenly everything starts to matter, and you really have to look at every area of the game. You have to look at all of the abilities that you know, that I was ignoring because they didn't deal damage, all the different utility effects that these abilities had, the items that I was finding. Suddenly I started caring about the defensive stats, whereas previously I didn't care about them one bit. You know, you start to look at things in the game that someone playing softcore would never care about, as you try to design a character that even when you lose your internet connection or lose power and your computer turns off, you can survive long enough for the game to eventually just kind of kick you out because they realize that the connection was dropped, and you might have to survive for, you know, 10-15 seconds or something like that before that happens. You start to really look at every possible thing the game has to offer under the lens of a microscope, and it's probably because of me playing that type of game, that game mode, where, you know, that's kind of how I look at most games that I play today, where I am kind of looking at everything under the lens of a microscope to try to gain some type of advantage, or just kind of take advantage of what, you know, the game developers have created for that game. But I really enjoyed this game mode. You know, of course, I died from time to time, lost characters, raged pretty hard, depending on how it happened. But it was really fun. It felt more like a complete game to me, rather than just looking at one half of it of how fast can I kill enemies. Suddenly, it was how fast can I kill enemies while surviving. And I really enjoyed it. Now, I still eventually got bored of the game because it wasn't receiving any updates, so I still did look to find a new game eventually. And I was thinking, well, my next game, I want it to be a hardcore game as well, because, you know, this is kind of all I want to play at this point. I want to play a mode where, you know, you have to look at everything because everything matters. If you die once, that's it. So I found a bunch of other games like this, and you know, they're not always classified as softcore and hardcore, because sometimes hardcore is the only way to play. You know, it's just permadeath is a thing in that game. You die once, you have to create something new. Now at this point you might be thinking, what, am I going to recommend a hardcore game mode for Marvel Contest of Champions? And no, not at all. I understand that most people do not enjoy this type of experience, and I will get to my suggestion to improve Alliance Wars in a little bit here. We need to continue the story just a little bit more, alright? So, I'm playing these hardcore game modes, these hardcore RPGs, and I'm really enjoying it. Really enjoying my time. Until I wasn't anymore. You see, I realized that, you know, it is a more hardcore experience. You only get one life. I mean, I think most people can agree that dying an infinite amount of times versus dying one time, that is a very hardcore thing to do, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that the game was any more difficult. You see, I think it was actually easier, and after a while it just started to bother me kind of how easy things were. And so let me explain what I mean. So you're playing an RPG, and let's say, you know, you get to the first boss, and the developers, they balance that boss around your character being level 10, right? And if you're level 10 and it's your first time playing the game, you know, you might get through that challenge, or you might not, you know, depending on how well you understand the game at this point, but if it's your first time, you're probably not going to get through it, and then you have the choice to either try again, or maybe go back and level up. You hit level 11, and then you go back and take on that challenge one more time, and this time you're able to get through it. Well, if you're playing hardcore mode, you don't have that luxury of dying and going back in after you kind of relearn the fight or get stronger. No, instead what you're going to do is you're not going to be level 10. You're also not going to be level 11. You're going to get to like level 15 before you ever take on that challenge. And at that point, when you're level 15 and the developers balance this encounter for you to be level 10, you're going to stomp it, right? It's going to be easy for you. So, you know, it is, like I said, it's a more hardcore experience because you can't die, but it actually makes the game easier depending on how you approach it. Now, there are ways for the developers to kind of force your hand and make it so that you can't just out-level the content, and there's other ways to, you know, to design the game to make it more difficult, but for the most part, the way I was approaching these games was as safe as possible. There were areas of the game that I never even experienced. Certain areas when you got to the end game, when the game got really challenging, that I was like, well, this isn't worth risking my character's life for, right? Like, if I fail this challenge, I'm gonna have to start over. I just put like 50 hours into this character. Like, I'm just not gonna do it. So instead, you kind of, or at least what I was doing was just playing easier areas of the game. It took longer to level up, it took longer to gather the resources I need to make myself stronger, but it was the safe route to go, and that's kind of the safe way that I played the game. And do you remember when I said I first started playing hardcore mode in Diablo 2, where I said I was exploring different abilities that, you know, I can select for my characters that I previously ignored because they weren't dealing damage, and they gave myself some utility and that type of thing? Well, that exploration was nice at first, but then I realized I kind of needed to just stick to what is known to be the best, what is known to be the most powerful and the safest way to kind of approach the game. Because when your character's life is on the line, it's not really a time to explore and try out different kind of funky ways to play the game. You got to play with what you know works. Alright, story time is over. Let's get back to Marvel Contest of Champions. What the heck was the point of telling you my past experiences playing Diablo 2 and other RPGs in this softcore game mode where, you know, if you die or fail a certain challenge, you can just try again, versus playing in hardcore where you only have one chance, and if you die, that's it. It's permadeath. You have to create a new character. You have to start over from scratch. What was the point of all this? Well, what I realized is that Marvel Contest of Champions as a whole is a softcore game. You could play it in a very hardcore manner, but if you die, if you lose your champion, if their health goes down to 0, they're not gone forever. You can use an item to bring them back to life, or you can exit out of the quest, and when you rejoin that quest, your champion is still there. The only way to get rid of them is if you sell them. However, Alliance Wars bears a much closer resemblance to a hardcore game mode than anything, and I think this is the reason why a lot of people don't like Alliance Wars. Actually, if you think about all the similarities between hardcore and Alliance Wars versus the rest of the game and kind of the softcore nature of it, in hardcore, you know, each death matters that much more. It's much more significant than when you die in a regular quest. Yeah, the champion's not gone forever, but man, like the feeling of dying in Alliance Wars, it's not quite it's not the same as losing a character that you invested like 50 hours into playing or something, but you know, it definitely hurts when you die in Alliance Wars, right? Especially at the most competitive levels where each death matters so much more, when alliances are only dying, you know, less than 10 times per war. It feels more like a hardcore game. You also don't really have room to experiment with different champions. You kind of have to stick to what's known to be best, right? That experimentation, it's gone. Whereas in a regular quest, even in the most difficult quests, like the variant difficulty that was just released, you know, we were experimenting a lot. We were trying out a lot of different characters, trying different, you know, at times trying different masteries, right? I'm excited to unlock certain masteries to kind of play around with them, certain class-based masteries that may not be known to be so good, but maybe in a certain situation they can really shine. In Alliance Wars, you don't really get that chance to experiment. And because each death matters so much more, we're also kind of pushed into this situation where we're trying to out-level the content as much as possible, so to speak, by, you know, using these boosts that take our champions to the next level in terms of their power. And of course, you know, because we feel like we have to do this in order to, you know, just stay alive in this game mode, that also puts a lot of pressure on, you know, players just in terms of the amount of time that they have to put into the game to continue getting these boosts, or the amount of money that they need to put in the game to continue getting these boosts. So it's very similar to playing hardcore, right? Marvel Contest of Champions as a whole, softcore game, but there's this one very hardcore mode within it, and it's one of the biggest areas of the game. And for the longest time, it felt like it was the only area of the game for players who had completed like the story content, other areas. And I know not everybody's completed that stuff yet. But even the players who have not completed that stuff, the players who are still, you know, going through that, they still have to face this kind of hardcore mode. So I do feel like that's one of the biggest reasons why players, you know, might not really be gravitating towards Alliance Wars as something that they enjoy. With all of that in mind, I'm finally ready to share my idea on how to change Alliance Wars. And I want you to keep in mind that, like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm only talking about one change here, alright? There's a number of things that could be done to Alliance Wars to improve it, but in this video, I just want to focus on this one change. And if you despise Alliance Wars today, it's not going to completely reinvent the game mode and suddenly make you fall in love with it tomorrow, but I do think it'll be an improvement. And that idea would be to reveal every single defender on the map, not just the mini bosses and final boss. I think that all defenders should be revealed. I don't think hidden defenders are doing Alliance Wars any good. I know some people are going to see this as me just asking for Kabam to make Alliance Wars easier, and I know Kabam has made changes in the past to make the game mode more difficult, so this probably goes against what they would have in mind to kind of change for Alliance Wars to improve it. But, you know, that's not exactly the case. I'm not asking for Alliance Wars to be easier. That's the whole reason why I told the story about my experiences playing softcore versus hardcore. I think if you ask just about anybody, they would tell you that playing in such a way where you only have one life, where if you die, if you fail a certain challenge, that's it. You have to start over from scratch. All of that time you put into it is gone. Start over. That sounds like it's so much more challenging than a game mode where you have essentially an unlimited amount of attempts at completing something. If you fail a certain challenge, that's cool. You just try again. You try again and again and again until you get through that challenge, right? That seems a lot easier on the surface. But my experience in playing these two game modes says otherwise. You know, it wasn't more challenging playing hardcore, it just was like a different set of rules that I had to follow. There was a certain limitation on what I can and cannot do in order to you know, get as far as I could in hardcore versus something like softcore. And I think that's all that really happens when enemies are hidden in Alliance Wars. It doesn't make things more difficult. It seems like it's more difficult, right? On the surface, you know, knowing who we're going up against seems like it's a lot easier than facing the unknown. But in reality, what it does is it kind of forces our hand. You know, I see Marvel Contest of Champions as a big, complex game of rock, paper, scissors, you know? I mean, the whole class wheel that you can look at is the same thing as the rock, paper, scissor triangle, or wheel, if you wanted to call it that, where, you know, there are certain counters in the game. Like rock, paper, scissors, of course, it's pretty cut and dry, man. You know, rock beats scissors, scissor beats paper, paper beats rock. But in Marvel Contest of Champions, it can't be just like that, right? So there's a whole bunch of crossover if you were to actually draw out all the champions and what they counter. And when enemies are hidden, we have to assume the worst, and we have to assume that, you know, because it could be any champion on that node, we have to bring the champion that can cover the most ground in a lot of ways. You know, you go up against a cosmic champion, a hidden cosmic champion, you don't know who it's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be Hyperion or Medusa, so you don't know whether to bring Power Control or True Strike. And instead, what you do is you bring a champion like Magic that can counter both of those. You know, like that's the reason why Blade was so popular. It's not that he was the best option in every situation. It's just that he kind of covered the most ground for the top defenders at the time, right? And then of course Kabam added a bunch of defenders that you know, weren't so easy for Blade to counter, and you know, the game kind of shifted. But still, it kind of locks us into these decisions that we have to make. It's not making things more difficult. It's making things less fun because we can't exactly plan out who to bring. We just have to kind of stick to the same champions that we're using. It goes against one of the pillars that Kabam described in their Alliance War blog post, where they said they want to keep the mode dynamic. Well, not only does being kind of forced into using the same champions not make things dynamic, but it also limits what they can do with the game mode in the future to make things more interesting, to make things more fun as well. And if you look to other challenging areas of the game, like the variant difficulty, or the maze, or the champions clash, or the map 7 beta that just took place, these areas, they don't have enemies that are hidden, but it's still challenging, right? And there's still limitations on what we can do because we don't have an infinite number of champions that we can bring with us, right? In Alliance Wars, we can only bring 3 characters, and sometimes, yeah, you are still going to have to bring magic because you have Medusa and Hyperion on your path, or maybe you're just bringing magic just because she kicks ass, and of course, why not bring magic if you have a magic? But the point is, we don't have to be so locked into it. We can kind of pick our champions based on who we're going up against and plan things out much better. So I'm not asking for Alliance Wars to be made easier. I just think this improves Alliance Wars. Going back to those 4 categories that I mentioned at the start of this video, the fun factor, the item or unit cost, the time, and the anxiety for each Alliance War, I think this is a slight improvement for each one of these categories. Starting with fun, I think it is more fun getting to see who you're going up against and being able to kind of choose the champions that you want to take in there to be a little bit more of an exact counter for each of those fights. And of course, because we're still limited on the amount of champions that we could bring in, sometimes you are going to bring champions that need to kind of cross over and counter multiple champions, but it does free us up to kind of pick and choose a little bit more than what we can do today. The item or unit cost, I think the item or unit cost would go down as we get to see ahead of time which defenders we're going up against, and it allows us to see exactly how strong we need to boost. It's another similarity between softcore and hardcore when I was talking about before. Whereas in hardcore, you need to be as stacked as possible before you take on a challenge. You need to out-level that content. Well, in Alliance Wars, in order to play it as safe as possible, in order to not die, people are boosting as big as possible to get through certain fights, even fights where they didn't need to boost that big. And I understand that's part of it, is kind of making that decision of like, all right, how big do I need to boost? But that decision is still there. And yes, maybe it definitely would lower the cost for the individual player. So that might go against what Kabam would like too, because of course, if the cost for each war would be reduced, then of course, that's less money that's being spent. But I mean, something's got to be said for people just enjoying the game more overall, and being able to kind of have a long-term a more long-term player base of people that are willing to spend money long-term versus just spending now and getting burnt out. So yeah, I do think that this would reduce the cost for each individual war. And make that more enjoyable as well. It would reduce the amount of time that each player has to put into each war, as they don't have to spend time scouting. They could just hit spectate and see exactly who's on their path, see exactly who they're going to be going up against. And it would greatly reduce the amount of time needed for officers who are most at risk of being burnt out, as in the most competitive alliances. I know not every alliance does this, but in the most competitive alliances, what players are doing is they're tracking exactly who's on defense for the opposing alliance, right? We report exactly who we go up against. All that stuff is tracked in spreadsheets, the ranks of the champions, if they're awakened or not, and who, which person in that alliance has that defender. And we just have these massive spreadsheets that the officers have kept track of. It would do away with all that. There's no longer would be a reason to have to track that stuff. There would no longer be that situation where you go up against an alliance and you find out that alliance, they got your defense from another alliance, and now you're pissed off because they have your defense. And honestly, I didn't think that stuff mattered much anyway, because it's relatively easy to scout ahead of time, and like I could see a domino on my path a mile away. It didn't matter. And it's like, it was really easy to tell who was on my path. So for the most part, I could tell without the defenders being revealed, I could most likely tell you with pretty good accuracy of who is coming up my path anyway, right? It would just kind of take away that, it would take away some of that anxiety of, oh no, am I going to go up against this defender? while also kind of leaving some of that there. Because like I said, some of that anxiety can be good at times, right? When you know you're going up against a challenge, it can actually feel good to kind of get yourself prepped and be like, all right, let's do this, man. I got something tough today. I'm going to conquer it. But it does take away some of that anxiety of not exactly knowing who you're going up against. Oh no, is that a Korg on my path? I don't know if I have a champion that can counter Korg, and I'm just going to have to roll the dice on bringing whatever champions with me, and maybe I'll get to that Korg and I'll just be stopped dead in my tracks type of thing. So it would take away some of that anxiety as well. And if you don't have a champion in your roster that can handle that Korg on the map, well, then you can have the officer kind of switch you before you even go down that path. So it would take away some of the requirements to have an exact champion for that encounter, right? So a lot of people complain about the RNG side of things where you're not pulling the right champion for the situation. And, I think it's a good thing to need to have certain champions for certain situations when questing, and to some degree in Alliance War, but not quite as much in Alliance War, of course. I don't want to see anybody locked out of Alliance War just because they don't have one specific champion. But depending on who you come across in War, yeah, it could be a nightmare if you don't have, let's say on a healing node, if you don't have Void, yeah, it could be an absolute nightmare. So you can kind of plan that out a little bit better and coordinate with your group, if you need to change your path for that situation because you haven't gotten lucky and you haven't pulled that right champion. But again, it's not making things easier. You can see Korg coming up in Variant or in the Maze, and that is still a challenging fight. You could see Killmonger on node 29 today, and that fight's going to be challenging. You know Domino on node 30 is going to be tough. Whatever final boss is there, if there's a Medusa final boss, depending on the champions that you have at your disposal, that's going to be a tough fight, right? It doesn't take away that challenge. It just, I think, improves the game mode. And that's pretty much it. Just to give a quick little recap, I think that all defenders in Alliance Wars should be revealed. I don't think that any of them should be hidden. The only area of the game where I think that hidden enemies are a good thing is an area like Labyrinth of Legends, where that's kind of the vibe of Labyrinth, something that we have to explore. Who's going to be the first to explore and clear the Labyrinth, and then as a community, make a map that we could all refer back to for that content. I think it's really cool in an area like that. But in Alliance War, I don't think it actually adds anything to it. I think it just restricts us and locks us into using the same champions, the same few champions, just because they're good against a broad range of defenders. It could feel especially bad if you're getting some bad RNG out of the crystals and you're not pulling these certain champions. People would still want them, of course, because they're powerful, but it definitely does make the RNG feel a little bit worse. It just feels worse not getting to use some of the more specialized champions in our rosters. It increases the item or unit cost per war, as we need to kind of boost to the max in order to reduce the risk of death the most, which I understand. Probably something that Kabam wants us to do, but that does lead to burnout, right? That's one of the things that is burning players out, is having to, get all these boosts and use all these boosts each war. It adds an unnecessary amount of time factor needed for each war in terms of scouting and the time that it takes for officers to do their officer duties, and it would reduce the anxiety of war a little bit, so it would make things a little bit more fun in that regard as well. So let me know what you guys think. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people that are opposed to this idea, just like all of my ideas, and that's totally fine. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.